Okay, we are recording.
Very nice.
Attendees are starting to come in.
So I just watched this one or took part in this one web broadcast, and they opened it up like 10 minutes early, and they used that time for people to be able to just like chat with each other. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. Like we could easily pull that off if we all got here 10 minutes early.
Yeah, that's a nice idea. We have a friendly crew. We got this chat feature. Folk can introduce themselves, say where
Yeah,
they're from. I like that.
exactly.
We just got to make sure we show up
Exactly.
10
So
minutes
we
ahead of
may,
time. Got to follow through.
yeah, yeah. 10 minutes ahead of time, I was still putting on my my collared shirt, so I didn't look like a bum. I was watching some video we did. Uh, One of you shared it, and I was watching it, and I had like a t-shirt on, and I don't know. It looked like I just had finished like a bike ride and then sat down to answer questions about something. I'm like, we can do better than that.
We do our best thinking after walks and bike rides.
We
It's all
do our
good.
best thinking. It is. It is. So,
Um,
how's things in Texas?
Things are good. Just kicking it. We're expecting rain for the next 10 days. So we're going to continue to
No,
stay hunkered
really?
down and lay low. Yeah. What about y'all?
Now
Everything
that
going
I'm
well?
now that I'm a gardener again, like a hardcore gardener, I'm tied into the rain more. Like when my home garden I can water, but my garden now needs God to help out, and it's
Sure.
been pretty dry here. So looking for rain here, but not 10 days worth, man. That's crazy.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, it is. Well, let's get started, y'all. Chuck, we're streaming to Facebook. That's correct.
Yes, we are streaming to
Okay.
Facebook right now,
Fantastic.
and also here with whoever shows up.
Very good. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Jacob Moses. I'm the community builder here at Strong Towns. And thanks for joining us for another round of Ask Me Anything. We've been knocking these out every week. We maybe missed last week, but for the most part, every week for about the past 2 months now. It's been fantastic, bringing in a lot of different subject matter experts to share their expertise in relation to building stronger towns. We have several fantastic questions to knock out today, inspired by a presentation that Chuck and this whole crew here, Rachel and Daniel, who we'll introduce here in a second, shared this past Tuesday about how communities can respond to the COVID pandemic, taking y'all through 3 phases about immediate action, midterm, and long-term. We have several fantastic pre-submitted questions to knock out in response to that presentation, but also encourage you to ask your questions live. If you hover over your Zoom window, in that bottom toolbar, you'll see a button that says Q&A. If you're sitting on a question, ask it there and we will knock it out. Joining us today, of course, we have Chuck, along with Strong Towns Program Director, Rachel, and Senior Editor, Daniel. How y'all doing today?
Doing good.
Yeah,
It's
very
beautiful
nice.
out here in Cambridge.
Good. I'm happy to hear it.
We are geographically pretty interesting connection here.
We are.
All Central and Eastern time zone, but you've got Texas, Minnesota, Florida, and Massachusetts. That's a geographic spread. We need to get John on here from Oregon, and then like someone from Arizona, and we will, or Southern California. We'll have the whole country covered.
Yeah, we'd be hitting all the spots. And before we get started, of course, I should mention that this week is the Spring Remember Drive over at Strong Towns. We knock these out a couple times a year where we take a week just to celebrate the folk who have, of course, generously donated to the Strong Towns organization and are on the ground advocating for these principles in their own communities. So take some time to celebrate what we call the heroes of this organization, whether they're an elected official, neighborhood advocate, planner, whatever their profession might be. And then hopefully along the way, encourage you to hopefully join the movement as well. So in addition to questions inspired by Tuesday's presentation, if you're sitting on any just general questions about your place or the movement, feel free to ask those as well. Chuck, Rachel, Daniel, y'all ready for the first question?
Let's do it.
Okay. Chuck, I'm going to start with you. I got one from Tony. This is a question inspired by Tuesday's presentation. Tony asks, what are your thoughts on cities, towns, and other agencies setting up loan funds aimed at supporting small local businesses?
Yeah, loan funds. It's interesting, and I think I might write about this next week because my own hometown here just set up a grant fund where they're giving out grants to small businesses, and it was one of these things that made me cringe. It made me cringe for a number of reasons. First, it's a paltry sum of money. It's $90,000 for all our businesses, and for the city, it's a big deal because we don't have $90,000 to throw away. But it's 90,000, and when you divide it up, they're doing $3,000 grants. One-time grant. And I'm not suggesting in any way that $3,000 would not be helpful for small businesses. Certainly if someone came, to us at Strong Towns and said, here's $3,000, we would thank them for it and be very grateful. But the idea that, somehow $3,000 is going to make a difference is kind of silly. The businesses that are going to survive or not, I don't think that's going to be the determinant. The other part of that made me uptight is that, when you look at where the city is financially, the city has been struggling for years. The city is going to be struggling really big time now coming up because we're going to get huge budget hits. There's going to be big cuts to local government aid. The city is going to need money. I mean, the city is going to be hurting. The idea of just in like the early days of this transition, rushing to do something just for the sake of doing it seemed really off to me. We would do better off saving that money and then being there when we actually have a plan, know what's going on, can really help businesses. I think some of these businesses that will get $3,000 don't need it. Some of them could use $20,000. Some of them could use a loan guarantee or loan assistance. The idea of just like randomly going out and doing something just for the sake of doing it with kind of the shotgun approach is I don't think very helpful. If we switch from grants to loans, the difference between a grant and a loan from the public standpoint is that a loan kind of denotes, I guess, one of two things. One, more skin in the game. Or two, a complete flame out. And let me differentiate those. If I know that like I'm going out of business or I'm close to going out of business or I'm on the edge and someone will throw me a life preserver of a loan, I may take that, but it might not do any good. In which case, why are we using public money that way? It's not going to get repaid. It's not like you're a bank and you're going to get collateral and you're going to get equity or what have you. And so, I'm kind of suspect of that. The other one, though, is that, sometimes if you give someone a loan as opposed to a grant, well, now there's, they're going to have to pay it back. So they're going to have to make a decision, do I do this or not? And there's a little bit more skin in the game when you go that route. So, to me, if you're saying loan or grant, I would go loan. But, with a loan, you have a really good chance of getting stuck with it at the public level. I think that all of these are, I think it's premature. I think we're too early right now for cities to step in and start giving small businesses money. And I say I think we're early because I don't know if the economic hardship here that we're trying to bridge is going to be a 60-day thing, going to be a 6-month thing, going to be a decade-long thing. And I do know that next year, all of our cities are going to face huge budget shortfalls. So the idea of like an entity that itself is unstable and fragile, rushing in a very short thing and doing something that really isn't going to be a game changer anyway, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense. I think cities would be better off holding back a little bit, seeing where things go, and then doing to the extent possible, at the end of the year, next year, when like things start to shake out and you see who is going to survive and who, is just going to immediately fade away, you can start to make some of those decisions. As a last kind of way to think about this, we've all heard the reports of, for years, certain percentage of families in the United States couldn't survive, beyond a $400 incident. Like they don't have the cash or the backup to survive that long. That's a personal calamity. And we talk about in the report we put together, the toolkit we put together, we need to work on getting people fed. We need to work on getting people shelter. Like there's some urgent things here. If you translate that over to a business, there are lots of businesses right now today that with 2 weeks off or 4 weeks off or 6 weeks off are going to go away. Those are not businesses that you're going to help with a cash infusion. Those are not businesses that you're going to keep around for 6 months or 12 months. Those are businesses that likely would have gone away anyway, even without, coronavirus. Like they were not long-term businesses. And you do not want to spend the limited amount of money you have as a government propping them up. If anything, this is a period of time to figure out who knows how to run a business, who has a good model, who can adapt, and then double down on those. So don't go the loan grant program. Just wait. Keep your powder dry.
Thank you, Chuck. Let's knock out another pre-submitted question from our friend Kevin Butler, who's joined us live as well as I'm hopping in the chat. Kevin asks, regarding a bottom-up versus top-down approach, what if neighborhoods insist that their needs are contrary to the suggestions in the ebook? And then he gives the example of, perhaps you have a neighborhood that's zoned for only residential developments. However, as you propose in the book, Chuck, perhaps some people want to consider allowing some neighborhood services in there, corner store, salon, whatever it might be. Kevin asks, how can we address resistance without going back into a top-down mentality? Rachel, I'd love to start with you on this question. Does an immediate response come to mind for you?
Yeah, and maybe my colleagues would have different answers, but first, I would say this book is definitely not a prescriptive list, and it's possible that not everything is going to be a good fit for your town or be needed there. But I would say the best way to address resistance and not just like enforce some policies from the top down is to listen to people's concerns and their values and try to speak to those. So like in the example that was given, if there's resistance to allowing neighborhood services in a residential area, then like figure out what the concern is. Are people worried there's going to be a bunch of traffic, loud noise, like, I don't know, trash? And so address those concerns by talking about how that business is meant to serve the neighbors that are already there. And, at a time when we're trying to limit our trips out of the house, having the pizza place that's down the block, that could be a really big benefit to folks. So yeah, that for me, it's first of all, like not all of these ideas in the book will be for every community. But also if you believe that one is for your community, then like get support of other folks, generate enthusiasm among people that do agree with you, and then address pushback by figuring out what people's real concerns are and trying to speak to those. I don't know if my colleagues
I also
have a
think,
different answer.
Yeah, I also think that there's to me, my mind leapt to like a formality, a formal process here. Like the neighborhood group shows up and they're got a spokesperson and they're upset. And I think that you're getting the wrong cues. The cues need to be where people are struggling. So when we go to the neighborhood and we humbly observe what's actually going on there. And so we're not like imposing mixed use zoning on a neighborhood. We're actually saying like, look, here's like a real lived experience. Here's how we address that experience. And we iterate off of that. And so, I do think that you will get people who, give you feedback like, I don't like this, or I don't want this, or this scares me, or let's not go there. But if we're grounding ourselves in the experiences of people in the neighborhood, it's not like we're as planners or as, elected officials coming in and saying, here's what we will do. We're saying like, look, here's like one of the struggles we're seeing in your neighborhood. How would you address this then? Like, how would you solve this? What would be your approach to making this a little bit easier? So I think if we start from that standpoint, it's less of we're going to the neighborhood with this proposal to impose a new zoning regime on them, and more about, hey, we're recognizing this deal. Here's how we'd like to respond to it. We're going to try this out. if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We'll take that feedback too, but let's try it and get going.
Yeah, and there are models out there that as you're, perhaps pitching this, proposal to your neighbors that can help give you an example for the folk that should, we allow a particular space to turn into some kind of neighborhood service. It's not a huge disruption to, usual life within the neighborhood. An example that immediately comes to mind, we have a Strong Towns member out of London, Ontario, named Steve McDougall, and he lives in a suburban neighborhood, but he has a neighbor who's really into coffee. And every Friday within their garage, it becomes a coffee shop for a few hours. Is there some more street parking if some of those neighbors happen to live a few blocks away and want to drive over? Perhaps. But it's been a considerable value add for that neighborhood. And like we talk about small bets, the people serving coffee out of this garage have to take out a big loan or sign a 5-year lease? No, not the case. Just a small, low lift intervention to serve their neighbors. So as you're pondering ways to pitch this, there's some great models out there as well to help give you some language and examples to share.
It's a great example because I think, I think about like how my city would deal with that. And they would say, well, let's create an ordinance so that in this zone, which, extends throughout the entire city, you can have a coffee shop. And then here's the 10 sub regulations we'll have. Mm-hmm. Reality is we should go out and see what the guy's doing. Like, this is great. The neighborhood's liking it. Let's figure out how to make this, not only legal, but allow him like the next step.
Sure.
And, let's carve that room in our city for that to happen. Mm-hmm. And for other people to copy it, quite frankly.
Let's knock out another. Oh, go ahead. Does someone want to speak? What do you got, Daniel?
And maybe we're going a long time on this question, but I have an anecdote here. I think if you're talking to people about this in your community, if you're trying to change minds a little bit or plant a seed, always go to the concrete, go to the specific, go to the something that they can easily bridge to from their lived experience and they can picture. Because people get that, and most people I think if you're immersed in sort of urbanist conversation, or certainly if you work for a city, if you're a planner, if you're an academic developer, you get used to the jargon or thinking of the abstraction, thinking of the zoning ordinance. My neighborhood association, the president of my neighborhood association, who I've met in person only once very briefly, but a few weeks ago, he shared an article on Nextdoor that I wrote for Strong Towns about building 15-minute neighborhoods where you can kind of get to all the stuff of life on foot within 15 minutes. And there was a hugely positive reception to this article, and just post after post, oh, I love this. How can we get to this? Wouldn't it be great if we had da-da-da-da-da in our neighborhood? From a bunch of the same people who I have seen react with sort of a reflexive, I don't want to use the acronym, but NIMBYism with regard to proposals that come from the city through official channels that are couched in the jargon of city policy. So I guarantee you, like, a planner comes to my neighborhood and says, we're considering expanding mixed-use zoning. And it feeds right into this perception of this is something that's being done to us.
I would assume if my planner came to me that there was some developer here in town who wanted to do something awful in my neighborhood. And the planner was there, trying to sell me on this and sneak this in so that someone could come in and do this.
I think that's exactly what people assume.
And that's actually a reasonable assumption, because we're not grounding our actions in the needs of people in the neighborhood. If you do that, I think what Daniel's suggesting is that, people will respond to that. Say, hey, up the street, here's what they're doing. Or you guys want to do this over here. Like it's a lot less scary. I did this thing here in Brainerd last summer where we had a neighborhood where there's a commercial strip through town and then there's a residential neighborhood and there's a block in between that's kind of this transition block. And if you ask people, they would say, we don't want commercial. We don't want, they would go through the litany of things they don't want. And then when we walk down the street, we'd say, well, do you like that? They're like, oh yeah, they're great neighbors. Like that's an attorney's office and those guys have always been wonderful and we really like them. Do you like that? Oh yeah, they cut hair there. It's great. They basically wanted a mixed use neighborhood. They just wanted nice neighbors. That's not unreasonable in any way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Let's knock out another pre-submitted question. Got one here from Cindy. And Chuck and Daniel, I'm going to direct this question to the two of you. I think you'd be great ones to answer it. Cindy asks, what data should communities track to measure the effectiveness of their responses to the pandemic? So of course, going through this ebook, we want them to still hold on to those core Strong Towns philosophies of, with whatever intervention we may pursue within the community, let's make sure we actually have data to track to measure that it's working well, not working so well, so we can react and respond as needed to those. Daniel, I'd like to start with you. What types of data do you think communities should track to measure the effectiveness of their responses to the pandemic?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I think I'm always a little bit wary of, and I got this term from Joe at Urban 3. I don't know where he got it, but analysis paralysis. There's I think you can get lost in data, or you can sort of over extrapolate from it. I mean, if you want to talk about a city's response to the pandemic, specifically the government versus the community versus the state authorities versus the federal authorities versus the hospital system, I mean, how can you disentangle those things? I think, so my approach wouldn't be so heavy on data in a narrow sense of that word, but it would be on constantly being in dialogue with the community and having the doors open and being very aware of what's going on the ground. So if I'm working for a city, I want to be talking to business owners that have been affected by closures, like constantly. I want them to be coming to me. I want to be using every outlet available to me to reach people, even outside of like sort of the normal channels that might have been effective during business as usual. I want to be talking to people in all sorts of neighborhoods. Like, obviously, like with social distancing, it's a little harder to be talking to people in person. A lot of cities are not having in-person public meetings right now, but there's social media. There are ways to get out there and throw out a bit of the rule book in terms of like, these are the formal ways that we conduct public engagement. Like what I want to know is just experiences and lots of them. And specifically, like Chuck said before, focused on struggles. Where is there something that you're running into a problem where the city might have a role to play in solving it for you or opening a door for you? That's what I want to know more so than data.
Yeah. I think that, to me, there's an easy list of things that I don't care about. I don't care about, like, for this grant program that my city is doing, I don't care how many people apply. I also don't care how many grants they give. These are like if someone came to you and said, we'll give you $3,000 just because you're a business in town, would you ask for that? Sure, I would apply for that. Would you be happy to get it? Yes, I'd be happy to get it. What does that tell you about need? What if I was looking at this program and saying, okay, how do we determine how effective it was? To me, the question would be, how many businesses were here that took the money that are here 6 months from now? How well are they doing? Do they report some kind of material benefit from that? Are they optimistic about the future? Do they sense that things are moving in the right direction? I think it gets a little bit more into the, what Daniel's talking about, the qualitative kind of data. If I'm monitoring response to the pandemic, I was writing down today because there was a thing I was plugged into. It was talking about organizational management. And it basically started off, this organization starts off every week asking everyone what your mood is. And they give you like 4 choices and you're kind of supposed to put a dial in. I think that that's actually more helpful data than anything else. Because if we went to our core businesses and we said, all right, what's your view of how things are at now? My guess is that they would vary in degrees of optimism, degrees of anxiety. Are you looking to hire people? Are you looking to lay people off? How are sales this week? I would want to know basically like general trends, as opposed to things like, how many parking tickets did we write? How many permits did we pull? How many grants did we give out? I think if you're looking at a pandemic response in the short term, you are looking at these qualitative things. We put in the toolkit a link to the Studer Institute's dashboard for Pensacola, and I think long term, those are the types of things that I would want to monitor. The one that sticks out is the kindergarten readiness. They recognized in their community, and this might not apply to everyone, but they recognized in their community that they were having a difficult time with student performance. And they traced it back to kindergarten readiness. And so they've had a concerted effort to improve kindergarten readiness. This is not something that's going to show up on a standard list of metrics that you would report in terms of transactions you accomplished. It's more a qualitative thing, and it actually prompts you not to do ABC, but to ask some deeper questions about the direction of the community and to actually try different things. And that's a good set of metrics.
Yeah, thank you, Chuck and Daniel. Y'all raise a good point about, not coming into these investments with, a prescribed list of metrics to follow. Because for many communities who go through this toolkit, this will be a new kind of intervention for them. We may not know yet what's the right things to track. The only thing that comes to mind with data, I wonder if, after a few years doing some of the investments that we've encouraged in the toolkit, I wonder if we'll find ourselves needing to have some metrics to follow to maybe help some of our stakeholders, in particular the local governments, kind of point to a winner, because sometimes we can do an investment and something good happens, but we can't say, oh, it's because of this or that.
Right.
So I wonder if in the future having metrics to say, this is happening because of this particular investment we made, I can find that being helpful.
Well, and going back to the loans, the very first question you had, to me, there would be some times where I could see a business coming in and saying like, look, here's what we need to do to adapt to this. We've been around in the city for 5 years, for 10 years. We've got a good solid base, but we need to do this addition, put in this plaza, get rid of these parking spots. It's going to cost us $20,000. We don't have the cash flow right now to get this. Would the city give us a loan guarantee or be a co-signer on this loan or loan us the money? Now we've got a business plan. We've got an objective. We've got someone, stable in the community who are trying to get through a crisis. Those are all things that have metrics attached to them that actually build a story that makes sense. If we've got someone who, just says like, I need $3,000 to keep my pizza place in operation, but I don't have a plan. I don't have a direction. I don't know how I'm going to adapt. I just hope this ends soon so I can get back to work. To me, that's not very helpful data, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Rachel, I have a question for you from our friend Deirdre. And Deirdre, forgive me, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Usually whenever I encounter names like this, I'll put in YouTube to make sure I get the pronunciation right. So please forgive me if I've mispronounced your name. But she asks, how can you unify a community where mask wearing is scientifically proven as a preventative measure, but is now politicized?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's definitely tough. I think we've all seen frustratingly how things have become very politicized. Everything about this pandemic has become politicized, when it's too bad that we can't, all just pull together. I've seen two major approaches. Either your city mandates it, or you have folks that lead by example. So I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we had this sort of like slow trajectory where at first it was like, these people, the city or the state strongly recommends that you do it. And then eventually a couple weeks ago, now it is legally mandated and they have fines, although I haven't heard about anybody actually being fined. But even before there was a mandate, I would say more than 50% of people were starting to wear the masks, and businesses were also requiring masks for entry. So that's like another way that it's just kind of the community just encourages it naturally. And for me, like the framing that has been helpful, and I know like we've probably all heard this, but I think repeating it is valuable, is that I'm wearing a mask to protect you and you're wearing a mask to protect me. So like if folks think I don't need to wear a mask because I'm not afraid of getting sick, or I'm not going to get very sick, that's like not the attitude that is going to get us to a healthier community. It's that we need to protect each other. I don't think we're going to get to everybody wearing masks all the time. Even, I'm still seeing people walk down my street that don't have them, even when it's the law. But the best we can do is lead by example. And I think, I don't remember if this was explicitly said in the ebook, but I know that Chuck's said it before in some essays, like your city leaders should be leading by example, and like the prominent folks in your community should be in public wearing masks, and that will hopefully like generate more folks joining the bandwagon.
I want to ask Rachel, because I do feel like there's a certain the politicization of this comes down to a certain like I'm just going to use the word shaming side of this. And I mean, I get the medical argument. I think it's very solid, and I get the human argument too that you made. You know, I'm wearing the mask not because I'm sick. If I'm sick, I should be home and I should not be out at all. I'm wearing this mask because I don't know if I'm asymptomatic, and I'm trying to protect you. You're respecting me by doing likewise. And I get that from a medical side. It seems like here in rural America, that carries no weight at all. And I don't know if that's something we could even go back and fix at this point. The argument that I've tried to make is that the leaders in the community, the way you described it, the people who are leading by example, should do two things. One, they should resist all attempts to use partisan language in anything they do. I mean, try to depoliticize and depolarize things as much as possible, because if you start using language of the left, if you start using language of the right, people will put you in a box and they'll hear everything else through that lens. But the other thing is to tie the mask wearing to economic recovery. Because truly, like, the way we sustain an economic recovery is to figure out how we all can wear, you know, a mask and be out in public and basically conduct life at 95% of what we're used to doing. And masks are the quickest, simplest, like, way to do that, to create a recovery. Is that against? I mean, I guess I'm wondering, or I'm pushing back a little bit on the idea of framing this as in a public health way as opposed to an economics way. The economics way being more universal, and the public health way, for whatever reason, seemed to be the one that's a little more polarized. I don't know what you would think about that.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Yeah, it does seem like that's the only way we're going to be able to like start being back in stores and schools and things like that. We'll see.
I'm muted. There we go. So everyone join us live. We are about halfway through the webinar. Again, if you are sitting on a question, please holler at us. We have a few here in the docket that we'll knock out. You can click the Q&A button in the toolbar and we'll knock them out. Chuck, I have a live question for you. This is from Trinity. Trinity asks, as I'm sure you guys know, the CARES Act only sent dollars directly to local governments with a population of over 500,000. And it can't be used to plug budget holes caused by COVID-19. The current talk for the next round of funding will send funding directly to local governments, and it sounds like support in the Senate and in the White House is beginning to come around. Assuming local governments are able to get direct funding, Chuck, could you talk to us about the best options for spending it?
Yeah, that's great. And hi, Trinity. It's very nice to hear from you. I hope, and we put this in the toolkit, I hope that it's not through infrastructure. Not that I don't think cities need money for infrastructure. Cities have huge backlogs of infrastructure maintenance. They have urgent things that need to be done. I've seen some compelling cases of, you know, investments in transit right now as being things that cities need to be working on. But what I don't like is I don't like the idea that it would be prescriptive. In other words, you apply for it, you show us your project, we would at the federal level, at the state level, approve and select your project, and then you would get that. Because really what that does is it funnels the response through the professional class. It goes through the engineers, it goes through the silos and the hierarchies of the city budget. And what I think cities need more than anything right now is flexibility. In the toolkit, we set out the 9 initial things that we thought cities should do. Get people fed, get people shelter being the first 2. I think if you're not at that point yet, that's where you need to be spending your money. That's where you need to be spending your resources. That's where you need to be putting your effort. I think that, when you get through that initial list, and I'm gonna bring that over here right now so I can make sure that I'm speaking to those things. To me, the idea of focusing on the immediate response, the public health side of this, the whole idea of, my city right now is doing a marketing campaign to try to get people, here, come visit the Brainerd Lakes area. It's like a tourist campaign. They're spending $25,000 on it. I think it's just throwing money away. I would like to see a more targeted marketing campaign towards support your local businesses by wearing a mask and getting out there and making that, normalized. To me, I think that cities need the flexibility because, Trinity, it's a great question. But for me to say, here's what you should be doing, like spending them, I think it's going to be a little bit different for every city. And I guess that's maybe like the ultimate emphasis here is that cities should be trying a bunch of different things, measuring the results of that and using the knowledge they get to iterate and change and evolve and adapt. And then, organizations like ours and others should be sharing success stories so that other people can learn from that. The last thing we need is, $1 million targeted towards some big infrastructure project. Back in 2008, we got $7.5 million to do a widening from 2 lanes to 4 lanes of a shortcut around the south side of town. It was a bad boondoggle project that had been put on the shelves. The stimulus money allowed us it was the shovel-ready thing. We brought it forward. We went out and did it. It's resulted in nothing since then. If you went to the city today and said you could have $7.5 million, no strings attached, to go out and do stuff, the last thing we would do is a project like that. We would do a lot of dumb things, no doubt. I'm sure we would. But we would do a lot of things that wound up to be smart and effective long-term and helped people out and made things better.
Daniel, I wonder if you could speak to that a little further. Say, you got that $7.5 million in Sarasota and you were tasked to go about the community and look for ways to invest those funds. What types of things would you be observing throughout Sarasota that folk joining us live may be able to relate to if they were to envision this scenario as well for their own communities?
I think you need some more frontage roads in Sarasota. Maybe a parking ramp in the downtown.
Sarasota did something really cool this spring, which is they're working on a new transportation master plan for the city for the next 10 years. And they put together a really nice online map interface where you could go on and you could look at a map of the city. You could view it in satellite imagery, or you could view it as a map, and you could find a location, like a great granular detail, and then you could put a little pin there and make your note. And they advertised this widely. It was all over Nextdoor. It was all over Facebook. I got emails, and it was, "You're a resident of Sarasota. Go do this." They sent stuff in the snail mail too, and they said, "Go. This is our transportation survey. You got a couple weeks. Go to this URL and tell us what your priorities are." And what a great bottom-up sourcing of like small bet projects that turned out to be. And like, admittedly, I went and I kind of spammed the thing because I have a lot of opinions about small transportation projects. So like 20 of the 200 or something responses were mine. And I know the city's chief transportation planner, so she probably just rolled her eyes at that and laughed. But it was a whole bunch of stuff that tends to get ignored where you have like a top-down grant program, because there isn't the obvious channel for like you're not gonna put together a grant proposal under normal circumstances for like, we want to add a pedestrian cut through, across the railroad tracks where there's this dirt desire path that high school students use to go to the high school, and yet like that exists near my house, and every day high school students are crossing the railroad tracks to get to school as opposed to going like a half mile out of their way. And like, what would it cost to like make that a nice proper path? Like, but under ordinary circumstances, like nobody's applying for a grant to do that, and the city's funds are stretched so many different ways. So like if you got a pot of money, like go ask people in the neighborhoods, what do you want to do, and do a whole bunch of small things and accept that like some of them aren't going to generate a ton of return for you and some of them are, but like, you know, it's almost like an investment strategy. Invest in like a portfolio of things that might individually be a little risky, but the portfolio as a whole is really solid.
Right now in my downtown, they're having this debate because the governor here in Minnesota said that bars and restaurants can open June 1st, but it's got to be all outdoor patio seating. It can't be inside. And no one can figure out what to do here. I said, just shut the street down. And that's freaking everybody out. Like, you know, oh my gosh, if we didn't have throughput on this street where nobody is today because there's nothing open, the world would come to an end. And I mean, I would love to see the city have some of this money and they can hire, put one of the police officers out there or put someone out there who can, you know, because we got parking on one side of the state highway that runs through town and we got the businesses on the other side. It would be great to be able to put out some cones, narrow up those lanes, make the crossing a little bit easier temporarily, let people park along that state highway. If we close the street, you won't have the parking along the street, but you're going to have the space for the restaurants. Well, now maybe you've got some confusion. It'd be great to have some temporary signs out there, get a police officer or someone with security to like direct traffic and wave people across and make that a real safe experience for people so that they felt welcome and they felt like this was a safe place. And, you know, you could brand it in some ways. These are ideas that have no place in a budget right now today because everybody's freaked out. You know, there's no money. But these are things that if we did them would have a huge, huge impact. I think we need to have these kind of innovative thinkers and innovative ideas and get them out there and give people, give cities the capacity to, in a sense, respond innovatively, respond creatively without having it have to come from, you know, the city clerk's budget, or we're going to cut the fire department by 10%. So we got money to do this other thing over here.
Sure. And a brief sidebar, if you're interested in a tool like Daniel described where, you know, you can see maybe like a Google Maps interface of your community, drop pins, areas where you've observed a struggle and want to have some ideas to address it. If you Google Strong Towns Plan Together City, we have a podcast with a gentleman who put together a crowdsourced program just like this. So if you want to start kind of pushing that culture of observing where your community struggles and sharing ideas, fantastic free tool to do so in your community. Rachel, I have a live question for you. This is from Bruce. Bruce asks, how does the pandemic experience change urbanism? Does our message remain the same, or do we adjust it somehow, either in content or emphasis, to the new reality? Rachel, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that is the big question. Also, hi, Bruce. How's it going? Yeah, I think over the last couple of months at Strong Towns and other websites that deal with similar issues, people have been wrestling with this question nonstop. And as we move past the point where everybody is, you know, on a stay-at-home order and we can actually start to go outside again and participate in our cities a little bit safely, I think the answers to that question change. And then, you know, similar to the way that we structured this book, like in 6 months, in 12 months, the answer will still change. But I think the overwhelming conclusion is like cities are not going away. We've had them for thousands of years. We're still going to be living in cities. So it's just going to be a matter of figuring out how we do that safely for the immediate concerns, and also how we take lessons for the future and rebuild in terms of our economic concerns. But yeah, I don't have a good answer. I think the basic building blocks of cities are not changing, but we're all going to be thinking creatively and figuring out how to keep adapting as things change rapidly in all of our communities in different ways. Yeah, what do other folks think?
I want to share a quick article, and then Daniel, I want you to weigh in on this. I just put it in the chat section. This is an article by Curbed, and it was so good. It's coronavirus is not fuel for urbanist fantasies. And it nailed it right on. And I think the quote that really got me right off the bat was something along the lines of, if I hear another urban advocate say, oh, this is a great opportunity for ... I'm just going to flip out, because it is. I do think that I wrote about this in the very early days. If you go back to like January or February, before the virus was a thing, there were people who were talking about this in two ways, and it's fascinating. They were talking about it in terms of like, this is no more lethal than the flu. And that was a pretty wide held belief among even a lot of progressive thinkers back in January and February. And then there was this strain of car accidents are worse. And in fact, some pretty prominent sites wrote articles and put articles out and had people on Twitter suggesting that, hey, instead of your prepper mentality and getting all freaked out over some virus that's no worse than the flu, be worried about the fact that you've got automobiles that are killing 30,000 people plus a year, and that's what we should be focusing on. And I do think that what you see is that incidents like this are an opportunity for people to take the thing they're passionate about and like shoehorn it into the crisis and say, okay, you care about this, but you should really care about this. I think getting back to the Strong Towns approach of, humbly observing where people struggle and actually addressing that, focusing on that immediate thing. And how do we make that better? How do we iterate on that? What I think it does is it forces a certain level of, and we always use the word humility in this, it forces a certain level of humility where we're not looking at a crisis and saying, here's the thing that I'm passionate about, or here's the vision I have, or here's the thing that I've always wanted to do. And now there's a crisis. And so I'm going to take this and like fit it into that crisis and use that as a way to sell it. Instead, this should be a thing where we say, okay, the world as we knew it was not the way we thought it was. We should really have some humility about where we're at and where we're going. And we should translate that humility into a more incremental, iterative approach that builds on success, builds on urgent needs, addresses what's actually going on, and uses that to create this strong foundation that we can grow off of. I have trouble. I struggle with any other way to actually look at the world, because it's hard for me not to see it as just out of touch hubris. Daniel, I don't know if you have I feel like you have a reaction to that would be stated in a nicer way, maybe.
That was pretty nice. At some point, Chuck, I think you and I are going to have a conversation about that Curbed piece that you just linked, because I also read it and I thought it was fascinating. And
okay,
I found myself having an instinctively defensive reaction to it, which was productive for me. I read it and I'm like, oh God, am I the target of this? Because I do think there's a fine line that you walk as someone who is an advocate for things, and your advocacy is well-founded in your knowledge. And and there's a fine line that you walk between trying to sort of, in a really shallow way, exploit a crisis to say, now I can make the case for the thing I wanted to do all along, or now this confirms all my priors, versus I've been saying for years that this was important, and guess what? It's doubly important now. And I'm not going to stop thinking the things that I thought were important because there's a crisis. So I think there's a line that you walk there, but I think, Chuck, you're dead on about how you do it with sincerity and with humility, which is a good way to keep yourself intellectually honest, a good way to check yourself is to start with someone's real struggle, start with someone's real experience, and say, where, if I want to make the world better, where is there a harm being done? What is the harm? What do I think would redress that harm? How do I know? What's my evidence? What's my basis for this? And I think doing that, I think it grounds you. I think it makes you a more pleasant person to talk to and someone people are going to trust and listen to more. I also think it's a good dose of perspective, because if you're doing this work with sincerity, you are going to arrive at some convictions that aren't going to be easily shaken. And am I going to stop being an urbanist because of coronavirus? No, because I can tell you why I'm an urbanist, and it has to do with thousands of years of human history and experiences I've had in all the places I've been, and a lot of people I've talked to and a lot that I've read, if cities survived cholera, if cities survived plague, there's history is bigger than this moment, and it's really tempting to, and I think social media also sort of amplifies the need to have a take, and to have it be the right take, and to have it be informed by everything that's happening right now, and that becomes this all-consuming. Does the coronavirus it's what's happening right now, and it needs to inform what we're doing right now, but does it need to upend all of our like deep convictions about how the world ought to be? Like, I don't know. Urbanism is still gonna be a thing when this passes.
For example, I think there are some real questions right now today about transit. And I think that urbanists come off as tone deaf when they pretend that there's not. Like, oh no, transit is just fine. No, I know people who are huge transit advocates who will not ride the subway right now. They will not go on the metro. And I don't think that that's unreasonable. I don't think that that means we should just ignore that. I think we actually have to talk about it, because transit is an important part of making cities function. And so how do we make it function in this way? When I had Jim Kunstler on, I asked him, about the cities, and I'm sympathetic to his argument that some of the vertical sprawl, the vertical growth has been less than helpful. I'm more in the Leon Creer camp of how do we continue to incrementally, repeat and replicate successful patterns over and over. But I think that there's a big question to ask and answer there. And I think if we're reflexive about it, we come off as tone deaf. We come off as out of touch. And I think you lose credibility. That was what I was getting at with the car piece. I mean, there's a lot of bike ped advocates that have a lot of really important things to say, and a lot of good insights. But when in the early days of coronavirus in Asia, you were saying, hey, don't be worried about it. More people are killed by cars every day. Yeah, but 1 million people are not going to be killed by cars this year, no matter what happens in the United States. And so let's stop pretending that these are similar things and actually deal with them in a way that's intellectually honest. I think you and I should do a Slack chat about the curbed piece, Daniel.
Totally. Sounds good.
We're about 10 till the end of this webcast. Try to get 2 more questions in here. Let's take another live one. Got one from Jonathan. Chuck, this will be for you. It's about ideal tax structures for cities amid COVID-19. Jonathan asks, what do you think about ideal tax structure for cities? My city survives based on the combination of earnings tax, and sales tax. However, the move to work from home has potential.
Those aren't volatile at all.
However, the move to work from home has potential to have our earnings tax for the next several years. And same for sales tax, he goes on. Jonathan finishes up with, as a result, we are at risk of losing significant sales tax revenue as well. Do you have suggestions for how cities should structure their taxes in order to be more, he uses the term sustainable,
Right.
We'll say endure. So amid COVID-19 and beyond, can we revisit our tax structure to ensure that we're building places that endure?
Right. In general, I think a sales tax and income taxes are fine when they're not used for things that you must have. When they're used to secure 30-year debt instruments, when they're used to pay for essential services that are essentially fixed costs year to year, they're really, really dangerous funding mechanisms. Here in Minnesota, we don't tax food, and we don't tax clothing, and we don't tax basically like essentials, and we don't tax any services. So sales tax is all on basically luxury goods. You buy a car, you pay a ton of sales tax. You buy a boat, you pay a lot of sales tax. You buy something you don't need, you pay a lot of sales tax. And so what happens every time there's an economic crisis? There's huge budget gaps everywhere because everybody pulls back on luxury spending. That's a bad tax for basing like long-term stability on. To me, what a good tax would be something like a land tax. The land tax is tied into the wealth built in the community. Ultimately, over time, what we want to build are stable neighborhoods that have stable levels of wealth. And so if there is a moment of volatility or a period of decline, we still have this, in a sense, savings, this repository of wealth within our communities that we can tap into. I think this is why things like housing bubbles and commercial real estate bubbles are really pernicious, because even in places today that have a land tax or a property tax, you're subject to, in a sense, the whims of these far-flung capital markets that are artificially propping up and distorting our base of wealth in our communities. So I feel like the answer is a land tax. The answer is something based on the wealth of the communities, with the caveat that because we have nationalized these, because we have made these more responsive to the international bond market than to local supply and demand, we've distorted these systems in such a way that I think they're even precarious and less helpful than they otherwise would be. But yeah, to me, land tax, property tax, income tax, sales tax, in that order of preference, with the sales tax being the most volatile. I've always said, unless you're a place like Istanbul, where, you know, the world's trade from 2 continents pours through your ports every year, regardless of what happens, having transaction taxes are really, you know, precarious kinds of things.
So everybody, we have about 5 minutes left. And I like to do something different to wrap this up. You know, kind of a core theme throughout this webinar was humbly observing where our peers struggle and doing the next smallest thing to address that struggle. And of course, folk, if you joined us at the live webinar on Tuesday, or read the local leaders toolkit they put together, you'll see these themes as well. You know, before COVID, we didn't necessarily realize the fragility of some of these silver bullet mega projects we were doing in our communities, weren't really feeling and touching the way in which we couldn't respond to the feedback, which is super apparent now with COVID-19. Chuck, Rachel, Daniel, I wonder, with these last 5 minutes, if you could just take a moment to share, you know, what are the small bets that you're gonna, or I'm sorry, not small bets, but the struggles that you're gonna start observing within your own community that maybe aligns with what we've shared in this toolkit. Chuck, I'd love to start with you and then move on to Rachel and Daniel.
To me, the one thing that's been very apparent to me is just the need for outdoor space. We you know, in a small town setting, we have streets that are mostly vacant most of the time. We have over-designed, over-engineered streets that don't have a lot of traffic. And so the speeds tend to be very, very high anyway. I know a lot of urban areas are experiencing that now because the traffic volumes are down and all of a sudden fatalities are jumping because there's a lot of speeding. You don't get that natural traffic calming. To me, in my hometown, what I've seen is 10 times, I mean, easily 10 times the number of people outdoors walking, biking, just really trying to stretch their legs a little bit and have a little bit of mental health time, and just simply not enough space for them. And so as I look at my neighborhood, as I look at my community, the urgent need is to actually take space that is now dedicated to cars that are in normal times lightly used, and turning some of that space over exclusively to people. And then taking the other parts where we are going to have vehicles and really focus on calming and taming the speeds within our neighborhoods. I don't want to fight the DOT right now. We've got a highway through the middle of town. If they got on to design it so people can drive 50 miles an hour and then, you know, put the speed limit at 30, I can't win. I can't fight that today. That's a long-term struggle, but we can absolutely 1 block, 2 blocks, 6 blocks off of that highway, make the streets more tame, put a cone in the middle of the intersection, just something that people have to deflect around to slow things down. You know, put out some straw bales at the edges so that people have a little bit less gap to cross, and it constrains things a little bit so people are slowing down when they get to those intersections. These are simple things that I would love to see us do now that would respond to what I see as urgent struggles of people just trying to have a tiny bit of mental health in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Rachel, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, 2 of the really basic building blocks that we talked about at the start of the book are food and shelter. And housing is an issue that I've always been passionate about. My husband and I have been involved in homeless shelter around where I live, and I'm just generally seeing the increase in homelessness, and we know that there's going to be probably evictions coming out of this as folks can't pay their rent. So I'm thinking about what are the creative housing options that might be available in my area, and what are the creative ways we can help get people safely and securely housed. And then also, I think one of the exciting things that's coming out of this is people paying more attention to where their food comes from, and planting their own food as they can, and buying from local food producers. And so we joined a CSA for the first time this summer, which I'm excited about, and planted a few of my own things. And I'm just watching all my neighbors starting to fill up their yards with vegetables, which is cool to see. And I'm hoping we can do a Strong Towns webcast on this topic soon with some advocates that are doing work like this around the country.
Yeah. Daniel, as we wrap up, what about you?
Yeah, it's been kind of a weird experience for me watching the pandemic unfold here, because when I do, I read the news, and it's in the local news as well as the national news, and I know the number of cases and the number of deaths that we've had at our hospital, including a couple of people in their 20s and 30s. So clearly it's here and it's real. I'm surprised how normal the traffic feels on the roads, how many people I see out and about without masks. And that wasn't even more so than a couple weeks ago. It almost feels like there's this weird sense right now of well, the governor said we're opening back up, so I guess it's gone. And I think there's going to be a reality check there. So it's very surreal on the occasions when I do go out in public, which I haven't been doing much of, especially we've got a new baby in the house. So we would kind of be quarantined, we would kind of be hunkering down whether or not there were a pandemic. So it's this very surreal experience where I don't feel like I have my pulse on how the community is experiencing this. And that's something I actually want to be deliberate about understanding better. I know what the policy responses are. The city this weekend is doing a pilot project downtown where they're closing a couple streets to traffic and allowing restaurants to use the street for seating. And I'm going to go down there with my mask on and sort of, vote with my feet by being a body in the space and saying, hey, I think it's good that you're doing this and I'd like to see it succeed. But also some of the more invisible responses, I've certainly noticed that we have a large homeless population in our downtown, and they have disappeared from the places they used to congregate. There's a park that has been completely fenced off with a 10-foot high chain link fence. The public library was a destination where they could get services and use the bathroom, and that's been closed for over a month now. So I don't really know.
Is the chain link fence a coronavirus response?
Yeah, it's an over-the-top, it's public health theater. We've got a lot of that. We're going to make a big dramatic show of keeping people out of this little park, which is just like a triangular kind of plaza in the heart of downtown. I've been yelled at for stopping in a park to take photos by myself with no one else in sight. A cop came up to me, and I think there's a lot of, in the same way that there was security theater after 9/11, there's been a lot of public health theater going on. We want you to see that we're doing something, but
right.
This park also has a real ridiculous history. About 10 years ago, in response to the homeless congregating there, the city removed all of the benches from the park, which of course didn't help one person get out of homelessness. It just moved them somewhere else and made it so that no one else could use the park. And after 3 years of people just lying in the grass there anyway and nobody finding the park useful anymore, they put the benches back. But we have a history of kind of stupid overreactions to things. Anyway, where I was going with that was just I know we have a homeless community. I don't know what they're experiencing right now, and I would like to understand that better. I would like to understand how the historically Black neighborhood in my city, which I live right on the edge of, is experiencing the pandemic, and what their needs are, because I don't think their needs are open streets for sidewalk cafes. There's a lot of questions I have. And I want to find ways to sort of do more listening and more understanding.
Thank you, everyone. That was fantastic. We are 5 after 1 p.m. Central, so sadly time to wrap up this AMA. For everyone who joined us live, thank you. This was so much fun. I hope you got all of your questions answered and maybe jogged your imagination a little bit about the small bets you can make in your own community. If we did not answer your question, as always, holler at the Strong Towns community site. You can visit community.strongtowns.org. Fantastic crew there, including all the folk we're seeing here, Chuck, Daniel, Rachel, and hundreds of other Strong Towns advocates sharing their hard-earned insights with one another. And if throughout this presentation and the rest of the stuff we've been putting out this week, if you feel inspired by this movement, again, this is the spring member drive over at Strong Towns. So again, if you're feeling this movement, you see how these principles can make your own place stronger, please consider becoming a member of the movement this week at strongtowns.org/membership. Chuck, Rachel, Daniel, thank you. That was a lot of fun. Do we
Thanks,
have
Jacob.
anything next week, Chuck? I don't recall.
We have Memorial Day.
That's right.
We have my birthday.
Oh, yes.
We have a whole
birthday celebration.
like long list of we have we you know what we're gonna recover from this member drive. We're gonna put out some great content, and we're gonna have a 4-day week, and here in Minnesota we're gonna kick off summer. So that's what we're gonna do.
Okay, sounds good. I'll be playing in the rain. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.